Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and in today's video we are going to fly the RNP AR approach runway 05 in Madeira. So the official name of it is not RNP AR approach, but it is RNP Zulu runway 05 in Madeira. Now, this approach basically replaces the conventional approach that existed with the visual circling by a method that can be flown with the autopilot to a much lower minimum. The minimum on the conventional approach is somewhere close to 1,000 feet. As you can see, if your aircraft has an RNP of 0.1, you can fly it down to 520 feet, which is really low, seeing that you are coming in very close to the mountainous terrain over here. Now, first of all, why is this an RNP AR approach? I kind of touched that on my previous video already. In order to receive the AR requirement, authorization required, meaning that an operator needs to be specifically authorized to fly this actual approach, the approach must have this curved straight in, or this curved part on the final over here. It is not a straight in approach. It doesn't provide the last couple of miles on a straight final as a normal RNP approach would. For that reason, it is certified as authorization required, and this basically means that you cannot just go ahead and fly this approach because you have charts for it and because it is in your database, but your operator, your airline, actually needs to be certified for it. And in many cases, as pilot, you need to conduct certain training in order to be qualified to do this. Say, for example, simulator training or an iPad course, you name it. Now, for this particular approach, we first of all got to check that everything in the database matches what we have in here. If anything is off in the database, then obviously we are no longer qualified from conducting this approach. So as you can see, going on to the flight plan page, if we do scroll through this, we have all that stuff in here, and most importantly, the final that you see drawn on the nav display pretty much equals what you would expect from the chart. Now, in the real world, we would go ahead and compare every single waypoint in here, compare all the restrictions, compare the vertical path that we have in here, charted on the final approach, and put all of that into our airplane. What's also important on this particular approach, as you can see, we have an RNP requirement. This means that the airplane has to be able to determine its own position with an accuracy, in this case of 0.1 nautical miles at 95% of the flight time or greater. So we want to be alerted if this is busted. And this can be done on the cruise page down here, on the progress page, where you can enter the RNP in here, and then you see the estimated accuracy, currently 0.3 down here. So 0.1 is what we need for this approach, so let's go ahead and enter this. And now, in case the estimated accuracy falls below, or rather becomes more than this value, then you'd see the accuracy going low, you will get a warning displayed on the nav display, and so on. So the Airbus really has some very good surveillance equipment for this kind of stuff. Now, with that done, what are we going to do? Well, we will let the autopilot pretty much flies down all the way, and that's as easy as it gets. So if everything goes well, we're going to end up right over here at the Mike Alpha 502 point, right in front of our runway, and at the correct altitude. In order to be able to do this, the airplane has all these constraints in here, but the really important thing is the vertical path that it has in here. So you've got the runway elevation down at the runway 05 point, and then based on that it is building the 3-degree slope. So your approach profile, your vertical profile, is built from the runway and its elevation exactly on the published approach path, and that is what the Airbus is indicating to you over here, and that is the important thing that we are going to follow. Apart from that, you may have noticed on the approach we have these 02 arc indications or 03 arc. Now these are the turns that are defined over here. Basically, the diameter of the turn is, in this case, the one of an arc 5 nautical miles from the station. So 5 miles away, say over here somewhere, that is where the arc is drawn around. And the same then happens on the later parts of the approach over here, which do get a little bit steeper than that first one. And that is what the airplane is telling us down here, and how the approach is actually made up. So And that much about the approach theory. Finally, for the setup, we don't need any nav setup since it's completely based on GPS navigation. Down here we can enter the landing runway, however, today the weather is good, so we will be visual with the terrain at any time anyway. Going on our performance pages, well, the speed is going to be completely managed on this one anyway. The approach page is entered with a minimum of 520 feet. We are going to conduct a flaps full landing over here. Technically speaking, the runway is long enough for a config 3 landing, but due to some of the turbulence and most importantly because of the pitch of the aircraft, I want the nose down as far as possible so that we have better visibility. For that I'm going to use config 4. Now, finally, in terms of extra fuel, well, I didn't enter an alternate because Porto Santo is right around the corner, so we do have plenty of fuel available. Alright, and that basically is our approach path. Let's go ahead and arm the exit from the holding, and with that we are now going to fly straight onto the approach. Now 230 knots is going to be our first speed limit here. Let's just proceed direct to prelim so that it cancels the previous speed restriction. And from here on we are going to start our approach. Now basically the autopilot can fly us down completely automatically. All we got to do here is we can already dial in the minimums basically, so down to say 600 feet, and we are just going to wait until we reach the top of descent that is drawn up down here. And as soon as we are reaching that, the airplane is going to take care of the rest of this approach for us. Alright, so with that, we're established on the approach. We have already completed the approach checklist and stuff like that. The cabin is already advised that they are seated, and since weather is not a factor for this approach, I'm going to activate the terrain overlay on this one. Now, what's interesting here is obviously an approach like this is going to take us very, very close to the mountainous terrain. In the real world, the terrain database is built up with an allowance for the published approach path. So when you fly an approach like this, you should not get any GPWS warnings. However, there is a rather complex theory behind all this, and many flight simulator companies do not simulate that correctly. For example, if you were to fly this approach with the PMDG 737, chances are you might get a terrain warning because the approach slope recognition of the GPWS doesn't really seem perfect in PMDG aircraft at the moment. I'm excited to see how the Fenix is going to handle this. I've actually not flown this approach with it before, so I can't really tell you how it's going to handle it, but I'm sure it is going to become interesting what's going to happen in the end. So we are now on the approach. Let's go ahead and arm the approach mode. You can see approach nav has already come on and final is armed. Now final is only going to capture a little bit later in the approach. Don't worry about that. Okay, 3 nautical miles prior to the descent point. Let's go ahead and start our descent here. So we've got descent alt magenta, 2000 magenta, because the 2000 restriction over there definitely is going to count for us. Hello, Emmanuel here. Thank you. Okay. So with that, the cabin is definitely secure. We're reaching the decel point over here where the approach phase is going to become active. And you can see we've already got the first speed restriction of 195 knots on the Mike Alpha 526 point. A little bit easier to see with the terrain display turned off. So when we fly an RNP AR approach like this one, we should be really careful with those speed restrictions. Usually they are in place to ensure that the turn radius of the radius to fixed turn later on here can actually be flown by the aircraft. Remember, the radius of the turn of an aircraft is exclusively dependent on its airspeed. So for that reason, let's go flaps 1. And in order to control our airspeed, or rather in order to be able to cope with these turn radiuses over here, we need to have our airspeed under control. Okay, speed, final approach. And with final up active, we can go ahead and set the missed approach altitude, which is 3000 feet, as we can see. And that is now set. Alright, well, thank you for maintaining my internet connection, Microsoft. Okay. So from here on, the airplane should be capable of flying itself down all the way to the runway. We are just going to monitor it, and we are going to make sure that the speed control actually works out. So if the airplane would have a problem achieving the speed constraint in, well, I'll call it VNAV to make things simple over here, then as a pilot we would have to intervene and we would have to control this manually. A little look from the outside to see what this currently looks like. As you can see, completely in IMC at the moment, but if you compare this with the standard approach that would normally be flown over here, where you would have to be like 2,000 feet lower and already in VMC, you can definitely see where the advantages of the RNP AR approach are coming into play. So we're starting the turn inbound towards the island right now. It's losing the vertical track a little bit here. Let's go flaps 2 to ensure that we have sufficient drag available. Make sure we don't get above 195 knots. Which it is doing right now. Okay, spoilers coming out. Come on, airplane. Now it's trying to trade a little bit of speed for altitude here, but the spoilers are out, so it should be capturing its path again soon. You can see the flight director is already commanding it. Alright, gear down. These are the typical things you will encounter in Madeira. Speed instability due to varying winds really is a big thing here. Okay, on the progress page we can see we are high, 200 feet right now, so the brake is coming back in. Not a problem here. Alright, 160 knot restriction over Mike Alpha 522 because the turn is getting tighter after that. And we meet this restriction now, so the spoilers can go back in. Okay then, the island comes into sight. Gelo and Rosario located right over here, which is where the visual part of the approach would also take us over. Alright, flaps 3 and flaps full. So with that we are now fully configured. Landing checklist, ECAM memo, landing no blue, landing checklist complete. And with this we can now completely focus on conducting the approach. A little bit of information for you.
Terrain ahead. Pull up.
That should not happen. That should definitely not happen. And that is a bug, as I mentioned earlier. As long as we're on the published approach path, the GPWS should be suppressed. And since it isn't, well, I'm just going to turn the system off. So that's the same bug that I mentioned with the PMDG. Looks like it also exists in the Fenix, that the approach protection or the approach profile of the GPWS is not simulated. Indeed, I'm not aware of any simulator aircraft then which would simulate that at all. Okay, so we're approaching the two visual points where the standard approach would normally take us over. The first one's located over here, the second one's located over here. So that's Rosario over here. I do believe they are planting roses there. I think that's where the name comes from. A little bit hard to see due to the quality of the scenery here, but I think this is the plant where they... or this is where they are planting those roses. Then you've got Gelo at the end over there, and you can see the lead-in lights coming into view over here. Okay, so as you can see, the aircraft is following a perfect profile over here. Normally it's 850 feet overhead Rosario, and look at that, we're exactly at 850. Yeah, thank you, Sim. Okay. And if we look down to the runway over there, perfectly on the Papi, perfectly on the final turn.
100 above.
Checked. And now just visualize how low the minimum actually is over here.
Minimum.
Continue. So this is literally where the minimum is, right at the end of the turn. And you can see the autopilot brought us in perfectly. Okay, autopilot off. We still gotta land it manually. That is one of the things that it cannot do on RNP yet.
300.
Wouldn't be surprised if that actually comes in the future as well.
50. 40.
Welcome to Madeira.
30. 20. Retard.
And here we are. Okay, we've got spoiler reverse green and decel. Right guys, and that's it. That's how you fly the RNP AR approach in Madeira, or rather the RNP Zulu approach, runway 05. Okay, 70 knots, manual brakes, we'll take it off the runway right over here. And with that, all I can say is thank you very much for watching, everyone. I do hope you found this one interesting. If you did, be sure to let me know in the comments below. I'm very much looking forward to your feedback on this one. And as always, if you like the video, be sure to like it in YouTube as well, as it really does help out the channel. Comment to let me know what you think so that I can improve future videos for you. And finally, if you're up for more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you really like what I'm doing and would love to show your appreciation, I would love a donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for your attention, thank you for watching, and then I see you all again on the next one.